Hey everyone, it's me, David Chen. Thanks for coming to my YouTube channel. I don't usually do TV episode recaps on the YouTube channel, at least not yet. But this week was an exception because there was a very interesting episode of the Disney Plus original series WandaVision that debuted this week. It was season 1, episode 5. The title of it was On a Very Special Episode. And this has gotten the internet in a tizzy talking about this episode. And I wanted to talk about it with several knowledgeable people. And I'm so glad that Dan Gvozden is here on the YouTube channel today to talk with me about it. Dan, thanks for joining me today on the YouTube channel.
I'm really eager to talk about this too, so I'm glad you reached out, David.
All right. Dan Gvozden, by the way, is the host of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, a podcast about all things Spider-Man. So if you're interested in Spider-Man and editions of him in the comics and in movies and things of that nature, check out the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. Let's dive into this episode of WandaVision. So before we talk about this episode, let's talk about overall thoughts on the show thus far. Like, how are you feeling about? We're about halfway into WandaVision, and are you liking it? Are you not liking it? What are your thoughts?
I'm really enjoying it, David. I think there's been some ups and downs, but the kind of overall feeling I have about it is I'm just really wowed by how its control of tone and how it's able to shift so effortlessly between, I mean, a variety of tones is maybe putting it mildly. We have multiple realities seemingly operating alongside each other, and historical sitcom formats, and comedy and drama and sci-fi and all these things intermingling. And what it reminds me of, and I'm biased obviously because I do a show about comics and stuff, but it reminds me of comic books and how comics are able to kind of balance the tone of silly antics of superheroes punching a guy in a grizzly bear suit 1 minute, and then doing something dramatic the next. And I feel like that's been the secret of the MCU, is kind of taking this ability to juggle all these things, and sometimes making fun of it and other times taking it seriously. But I feel like, and this is just a very early entry in their television format, but I feel like immediately it's almost like a no-brainer that Marvel should have been doing TV for a long time. It's this sequential narrative of comic books. It just seems like a perfect marriage, and I think this show is really utilizing it for its maximum capacity, I guess. Some things have been better than others. I didn't love episode 4, which was kind of like a long recap, but I understand for a lot of people that was probably the episode that convinced them that the show had some ideas it actually wanted to kind of like. It wasn't just a confusing mess that they would never understand. But I felt like this episode really quickly rebounded and established a new normal for the show, which I'm sure it will quickly upend. And so this is a long way of saying I've been really enjoying it, David.
It's interesting you say like, Marvel hasn't really been in the TV space, but they have. Obviously there have been TV shows with Marvel characters in them, and there has been like Agents of Shield. How do you think about those? Do you count those?
I think they exist, so they count on the spectrum of like they were shows.
Well,
But
you're
yeah,
saying it like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Marvel shows were on TV? And it's like, well, they already have been a little bit, Dan.
I guess it's just like the particular approach of like the Marvel Studios and like Kevin Feige is unique to this show, which
Hmm.
is that unique blend of, obviously a mix of tones. I think if anything, like the Netflix shows, you could knock them for being very specifically one tone and never deviating from it, which was incredibly dark and violent and like uncomfortable to watch. Um, and there's definitely a lot of darkness, specifically in this episode of WandaVision. But um, yeah, I mean, when I read a Daredevil comic, yeah, it can get really dark, but it always has that kind of balance that I think we haven't seen the MCU Daredevil yet, and rumors want you to believe that the MCU Daredevil and the Netflix Daredevil are the same guy, and I won't believe it until I see
Yeah,
it. But
the door is now open for
right,
them to be different. It could be the same actor that portrays them both. So we'll see.
yeah,
Okay, so some of my thoughts on WandaVision. I was initially kind of put off by the sitcom approach because I felt it was so opaque. Like, yes, yay! Like you were able to recreate these sitcoms in loving detail, and then it's like, well, that was amusing to me for about like 10 minutes, and then I'm like, well, what's the rest of the story you're trying to tell? And the first two episodes were I found to be like fairly alienating. Like I didn't I was like, this is going too slow for my taste. But then episode 3 reveals a little bit more of the world, and then episode 4 kind of pulls back the entire curtain, basically. So it's like explaining, hey, we're very much in the world that you understand from the MCU films. And it's interesting kind of to see the reaction because some people see what's happened with the episode 4 and 5 and they're like, oh, this is just going back to the way it usually is in the Marvel films. And like I liked how different WandaVision was. For me, I liked most of the movies in the MCU. I enjoy them. I don't necessarily know if they're groundbreaking from a storytelling perspective, but I like them, and I like that this show, WandaVision, is kind of giving us more of that universe at production values that seem very high. Like this feels like it could be movie level. It doesn't feel like, oh, this is the B team, of the people that are making this stuff, and they're, oh my gosh, did you see the guy flying through the sky just now? Like they're not like faking that, like they can't, actually have all the visual effects and things of that nature on the TV show. This does feel like the storytelling is on the same scale of an MCU film, and that also I find to be quite refreshing. So I am really into the show now. I was really into it starting like episode 3. Episode 4, the episode entitled We Interrupt This Program, begins with Monica Rambeau kind of reassembling from the blip. And then you see basically that, like, and I recorded a podcast about this like years ago with Brian J. Rohn about this topic on the Slash Filmcast, about how the plot mechanics of Avengers Endgame, if you think about them for more than 3 minutes, are horrifying, right? The
yeah.
idea that people who you think are gone and dead for 5 years, everyone's moved on with their lives, and like these Avengers, they're like, hey, no, we don't accept loss. We're gonna bring everyone back. And it's like, it's framed in the movie as this is a massive triumph, but in reality, it would create lots of horror and confusion in the way that we saw in episode 4. And I liked that even though the show didn't fully deal with it, it at least nodded to it. And the way that the opening scene of episode 4 was done was like really effective, I thought, right? So
Yeah, and I think you get like some nods to that even in this episode where they bring up Captain Marvel, and Monica Rambeau clearly has mixed feelings on the character. And I don't know, not to sidetrack us, but I always feel like there's this conversation going on around the Marvel movies where, like, in between the Marvel movies, people lament the existence of the Marvel films and what they're doing to the world of cinema. And then when a Marvel movie comes out, everybody is the quickest to champion how like wonderful they found it. And, oh, there's surprising depth, and the characters, there's a lot to them, and there's more to this universe than we realized. And then within a week, people forget that they had that experience, and they just want to knock on the biggest thing to exist. And that's not to say there's not problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I think people are very quick to forget that there really is a lot of like real thought going into this world. And, it wasn't a surprise to me that we got the other end of the blip and saw some of the horrors that it created. Even if Spider-Man Far From Home tried to kind of gloss that over with a bit of a shine, but yeah.
right. Spider-Man Far From Home kind of acknowledges the blip, but it's very like, not a big. It's kind of played for laughs.
Yeah.
But let's get to. So I basically am saying I liked last week's episode. I thought it was like, wow, the way that they show people coming back from the blip is so horrifying, and We rarely see horror movie-esque stuff in the MCU, and I appreciated that. I appreciate they're like really stretching, in my opinion, kind of the tones and the storytelling techniques that they're using in this show that maybe would be impossible in films, right? So I like all that. And
Yeah.
then this week's episode happened, and we got to talk about it. So this week's season 1, episode 5, on a very special episode. We're gonna spoil it, so if you haven't seen it, come back to this video after you've seen it. But every episode of the show has kind of been going through the decades in terms of sitcoms. We've got the Dick Van Dyke Show, and this week is very clearly kind of a nod to like Family Ties, Full House, like that kind of stuff. And I think that so let's talk about the episode, like all the events of the episode before the finale reveal, right?
Sure.
What did you think of the episode overall before we even get to the finale?
Well, I mean, I thought it was a really like a nice jump back into kind of like the course that the show had plotted kind of before episode 4. I have a bit of a different opinion than you on the first 2 episodes. I like enjoyed that kind of pastiche.
Yeah.
But this one is kind of the perfect marriage between like doing that style and still advancing the plot in significant ways. And I think the most interesting thing for me is kind of around this like WandaVision, which is the title of the show, interplay that's going on. As Vision seems to be like kind of waking up from whatever it is that Wanda has done to him.
Yeah.
Which we get a little more information on in this show. And, we get some weird stuff with the kids and the neighbor Agnes, who I think also has a really interesting role in the show. And I mean, I thought the episode, like forgetting the last 20 seconds of the episode, which is like all the internet is really talking about. I think the rest of the episode is equally significant in terms of like character growth and challenges, that really offer up a lot of interesting questions. If Vision is this walking corpse and he is coming to some kind of realization about a situation, is that Wanda coming to a realization?
Because the whole time you've been led to believe that it's Wanda that is doing this, right? At the end of last episode or a couple episodes ago, Monica says like, it's Wanda, it's all Wanda. But the more we see of the show, it feels like that's not the case. Like that there's something else either compelling Wanda or working in concert with Wanda. Because if Wanda's in control of everything, why would she make a version of Vision that questions his own existence, right? Like, why wouldn't she make a version of Vision that's like, everything's great, honey? Like, it doesn't quite make sense. There's a piece of the puzzle I think we're not yet seeing. So that's part of it. I thought the episode...
Shout out to Paul Bettany's haircut in this episode.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I thought the episode was great. And... so there's a few things I want to highlight about what I like about the show at this point. Number one is anytime there is a break from the sitcom format that is established, it is genuinely upsetting. Like I get physically uncomfortable when I'm watching a show and it's like, oh hey, sitcoms, laugh tracks, and then all of a sudden one of the character like speaks like they're not in the sitcom anymore. That happened right from episode 1 where the guy was choking, right? And, he's just like, stop it. And it's like, whoa, like this is upsetting. And that happened this episode too when Catherine Hahn characters was like, do you want me to take that again? And Wanda's like surprised. She's like, she's taken aback. Cause like, she's like, why are you asking me this? And, there's something going on we still aren't really privy to, I think.
I watched that a couple times, and I still can't tell whether it is Wanda like feigning
ignorance, or if she is genuinely like confused by Agnes's comments, right?
Yeah, because there's a very easy way to like couch that as just her like kind of trying to still hide and cover up things as she's done in the past.
Correct.
And that really is in character. So I'm with you on like that. There seems to be some other like force going on. I mean, we have what, 3 episodes left, so
Four, I believe. Four. So
4 episodes left. So I'm not entirely sure like how you know squeeze in a whole other villain and all the other things this show
well,
seems to
I
want.
think it's highly likely it's a character that's already been introduced in the show.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Agnes is someone to keep an eye on. I think her reactions to things have been very interesting.
Yeah.
Specifically in this episode where she seems to have this kind of like step back, like kind of removed attitude about finding out that Wanda is able to revive things from the dead. Like her reaction to that is not in character with this universe.
Yeah.
She's kind of like almost assessing it, like what's going on here. And the big, kind of like comics speculation is that this is a character named Agatha Harkness.
Yes.
I don't know how much you know about this character.
Let's get to that later.
Sure.
We have a bunch of open questions, but I was just I want to get back to like what I am enjoying about the show. So
Sure.
Loving the kind of snap out of the world that we're in, and it's just like very upsetting when that happens. It's like this the show is using the fact that it's a incredibly meticulously detailed recreation as part of the storytelling itself, which I really appreciate. It's not just like complete masturbatory. I loved Dick Van Dyke when I was a kid. It's like
Sure.
because they're doing such a great job of recreating the milieu, the look, the style of these shows. Whenever the characters deviate from it, it's like very jarring, and it works as part of a storytelling device to jar you out of kind of your enjoyment of the sitcom format. Second thing I really appreciated is really this episode, season 1, episode 5, takes a hard turn into horror, right? There's this moment when Vision kind of snaps this guy out of his situation while he's at work, and it gets really detailed. First of all, he says, I think the guy says something like, "You have to stop her. Like she's control." And he says something like, "It's agonizing," or he explains that like they are in deep suffering, like what is being done to them is very painful. And then he's like, "I gotta call my sister. Like she's taking care of my dad who's sick." I'm like, "Whoa, this is getting real. This escalated super quickly." And I like that. You're basically getting this vision of these people who are basically kind of in deep suffering and kind of a mental slavery to an unknown force. Now, the guy says you have to stop her. He doesn't say you have to stop Wanda, right? I think we're meant to assume that he's talking about Wanda, but I still think it's unclear, particularly because you get to the end of the episode. And she says, like, "Do you think I'm controlling like all the dogs and the so and so and the such and such out there?" And as the audience, I'm thinking to myself, "Yes, I do think that." But the fact that you are so resistant to it makes me think maybe there's something else at play here. But I assume you thought it was Wanda that he was talking about, and you did not question that at all.
No, I didn't. I mean, I do think there's something else going on in the show yet to be revealed. I think I'm still kind of adhering to my like comics knowledge, which we can talk about later in this House of M thing. But I guess I didn't question it, that specific line reading, but I think that's a good observation.
So let's get to the end of the show. So I want to talk about what happens at the end, and then there's like a bunch of open questions about WandaVision that still need to be discussed, right? Like, and we can allude, and part of them has to do with the ending, part of them have to do with things more generally. Then we can then talk about Harkness and things of that nature.
Sure.
So Wanda and Vision are having a confrontation, right? I was just describing it. She's like, "Do you think I'm controlling everyone? Like, what is wrong with you?" And they both kind of, Vision gets pretty angry. Like he wants Wanda to tell him the truth. And then the doorbell rings, and they go over, they answer the door, and possibly one of the most shocking moments in all of, watching superheroes on TV and film history for me personally occurred, right? Like I was so surprised. Like I was shocked, and I was like, what is going on? I don't even understand this. But I think it's incredible. But basically, I'll put a little image up in the chat. At the door is Wanda's brother, Pietro, otherwise known as Quicksilver. But he is not the same Pietro from the MCU, who is played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, right? He is Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men franchise, specifically the character that was first introduced in Bryan Singer's X-Men Days of Future Past, played by Evan Peters. So he's a different version of Quicksilver from a different universe of films, and he acknowledges that, like, hey, he's Wanda's brother. And I mean, my mind was reeling from this, and I guess what was your reaction when you first saw this happen?
Well, unfortunately, I was kind of spoiled on this from the casting announcement of Evan Peters, which like leaked online. Like we didn't know specifically that this would be the role that he would be playing, but curious minds could make connections if they wanted to, which I did. I wasn't expecting him necessarily to show up in this episode, so it was still a surprise to me. So my genuine reaction is, okay, like now that they've done it, like what do they mean by this? Because there's
Right.
like you could take dozens of different implications for what this could mean for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My first real laugh is that, like, and this is a lingering thing, is that both the Quicksilvers in the MCU now were like best friends in the Kick-Ass movie, which is kind of a weird aside. But yeah, I mean, if you're eager to unpack it, like that's where my mind immediately went, is like, okay, so what
does this mean?
could mean?
Okay, here's what I can say. Here's what I can talk about. What I don't want it to mean, I guess.
Sure.
What I don't want it to be is stunt casting. Stunt casting would be okay as long as they do a good job of explaining it. The Kat Dennings character says, like, she recast Pietro, and I think there's something like they could play out the rest of the show and never acknowledge the X-Men universe. Like they could, it could be coincidental that it's Evan Peters that plays him, and it's just like they never acknowledge it. And it's just the significance is that she recast Pietro and chose another dude to be her brother. And I think that would actually be okay. Like, it would be like, oh, just a nice little Easter egg for fans, and then they never talk about again that he was Quicksilver in another life. He just in the universe of this film or this series, he's just another dude that's not Aaron Taylor Johnson, and the significance is she chose another dude, right?
I think it would be hilarious if they used this, like if it's just that, and they used it as an excuse to go back and explain like what happened to Ed Norton and like the original War Machine. Like this is just now their excuse for why they recast people, looking retroactively.
So I mean, it could be just that, where they don't acknowledge it at all, and it's just, hey, a nice little nod to fans. In which case, I would say it's, to use a turn of phrase, it's a blip in the show. It's like next week they move on and whatever. But there is a possibility, Dan, that this is the way they're opening up the idea of the multiverse, right? We know that multiverse is going to play a big part in Doctor Strange Part 2. We've heard rumors that they're hiring like Alfred Molina and like other random Spider-Man characters to be in the next Spider-Man movie, and it's like, how the heck are they going to tie all this stuff together? And one of the answers might be the idea of the multiverse, that like all of the same, all of the superhero characters we've seen are part of different universes that exist adjacent to each other, and that they can like interact with each other, which would be very, very exciting, right?
I agree.
Go ahead.
I think that's much more likely the possibility here, rather than like any kind of stunt casting. And I think there's actually some clues within this episode prior to the ending of this that suggest as much. There is a sequence with, you know, I guess I'm forgetting Kat Dennings' character's name.
I think it's Darcy,
Marcy.
right?
Yeah, Darcy.
Darcy Lewis. Yep.
And Agent Wu. They have this scene where they're discussing like the hex, and Agent Wu suggests like, did Wanda ever have a code name? And you know, Wanda has never been called Scarlet Witch
In
which
the
is
MCU.
her comic book name. Yeah,
Right.
in the MCU, and you know, there's speculations about why that is and what that means. I think Scarlet Witch is a name that's more directly tied to the X-Men franchise, and you know, the name Scarlet Witch is a reference to like a title within the Marvel universe. It you know, there was a Scarlet Witch before Wanda, and she's like the most recent inheritor of magic or whatever. And you know, they were never allowed to be called mutants in the MCU because that's a Fox thing. But now that Disney has, you know, acquired Fox, which is a strange sentence to say, still, they can lean into that a little bit, and just even having the conversation about Wanda having like another name, or even just using the hex, which is what they call her powers in the comics, her hex powers, to me is a suggestion that like the walls have kind of been broken down about like treating her like her X-Men character. And you can even see in the trailers, there's images of her in her like classic Scarlet Witch costume that are yet to come on the show. And so I think, you know, in my mind, there's a very real reality of where this show goes. Actually, Wanda, you were a mutant all along, and these mutant, like the evidence of mutants or whatever, or Wanda's from another universe, and the evidence of this mutant or this crossover between universes has been hidden, and the madness that is coming back to her now is a part of remembering that element of herself and where she came from. There's a famous comic storyline that this series draws from heavily and references heavily. You could even see in this most recent episode, there's a scene where Vision is reading a newspaper, and he folds the newspaper together at one point, and the letters spell out HOM, which stands for House of M, which is
one of the comic
storyline.
books that inspired this series.
Correct.
Basically. Yeah.
One of many, yes. And that series is kind of about Wanda going insane after she realizes that her twin children that she has with Vision don't actually exist. And interestingly enough, in the comics, they begin to realize that her children aren't real because she allows Agatha Harkness, this other witch.
She's like a mentor, right? Is that right? In the
yeah.
Agatha Harkness, who we think Agnes might be in this series, right? Yeah.
Correct. And I think we got the biggest clue to that in this episode, because when Agnes comes over to babysit the kids disappear. And in the comics, the first real idea that we had that the kids weren't real was every time Scarlet Witch would leave the room with the kids, and specifically leave Agatha Harkness to babysit her kids, the kids would disappear. And we get that exact reference here in this episode where the kids suddenly disappear when Agnes is watching them. Of course, here they're growing up at an alarming rate, which I thought was really a fun visual.
Yeah.
And those two kids are actually wearing like very like colors and design to the costumes of their comic book like adult counterparts, which is a whole other thing I won't get into. But House of M concludes with Wanda being frustrated at her father, who has and hasn't been Magneto. It's another complicated thing.
Well, this is the thing: is they in the Fox X-Men universe, Magneto is implied to be Quicksilver's father, right?
Correct.
But in this MCU, he's clearly not their father, or as I think all indications point to her father not being Magneto in this universe, right?
Well, we don't really have any idea of like what their parentage is at all. And I actually found it really curious if in this episode when they're doing the opening credits and it shows all the photos of them growing up,
Yeah.
like you have like Kid Vision and Kid Wanda, but there's no Pietro or Quicksilver in the photos with Wanda growing up,
Mm-hmm.
which suggests to me that like maybe there is no history here, right? Which would go to my other theory about maybe these two characters are not from the MCU originally, or something along those lines, right?
So you think
Quicksilver's not
that
in the
Wanda
pictures,
you think Wanda Maximoff's father in the show or in the MCU could still be Magneto? That she's
I
like
think
from a different universe, basically.
I think there's a possibility of that. It's not immediately where my brain goes, specifically to the lineage, but I do think that there is some history retconning that will be done around these twins, which would be like, man, what the ultimate long game on not talking about where these two came from. But I mean, remember, they were kind of manipulated with the Mind Stone, all the way back in like Age of Ultron. To say, I think the original idea was that they were just people with miracles, and there was a suggestion that the MCU would make them into Inhumans, which is a whole other thing. But they really have remained vague on where these characters are from, and I feel like this is a perfect opportunity to do that because I don't really know how else you bring just from a storytelling perspective. How else do you bring the idea of mutants into the MCU? There's no natural path to discussing like what a mutant is or isn't, because it's not a concept.
I don't agree with you because I feel like, hey, the X-Men universe happened in this whole other parallel universe that is completely unknown to all the people in the MCU, and basically Wanda Maximoff kind of blipped in this guy from that universe, into her current story that she's in right now. I mean, that's completely defensible way of explaining it, right?
Well, yeah, no, I actually think that that's a really good way of explaining. I just mean more like broadly the concept of what a mutant is. People are saying that this is kind of the anti-House of M. So House of M concludes with Wanda furious at her father and her brother who tricked her into creating this alternate reality where everybody got what they wanted. And she decides, there needs to be no more mutants. And she erases like a very like large part of the population of mutants in the Marvel Comics universe. So people are suggesting that this show could be the opposite, where she says like, no, I want more mutants. And, the whole universe is now filled with mutants that, were never there before, or maybe have their powers activated or something like that.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know why she would say that if we haven't introduced the concept of mutants into the Marvel Cinematic Universe as like a more broad theoretical concept. Anyway, now I'm going down like a whole rabbit hole.
Let's go back to show.
Yeah.
So here are some things that are kind of my big questions. When I think about the show, here are like the things that I want answered. Okay. Question one, who is actually responsible for the events going on at Westview, right? Is it just Wanda? Some people have speculated it is the guy who's in charge of SWORD, the director of SWORD or whatever, the douchebag guy, Monica's boss, basically.
I don't buy that.
Some people have speculated Dottie, the blonde woman from episode 2. Agnes does say the word like Dottie, like controls everything, So I'm like, I wonder like if any one of those characters is like actually pulling the strings here. Curious. Question number 2, what is going on with the children, right? There's a few moments in episodes 1 and 2 where they say like for the children. It seems like the twins that Wanda has are actual children. Like they're not, they're behaving as though they are in base reality versus they are, kids from the town of Westview that she's like psychologically taken over. On that note, what is going on with the children from Westview? Where did they go? Because she points out, Vision points out in this episode, there's no children in Westview, like other than the twins. Where are they? What's going on? We don't see a child in the entire series. So those are my big questions that I have right now. Is like, who's responsible, and also like for what purpose, and also what's going on with the children, and then finally, the thing we just spent 10 minutes discussing, which is what are the multiverse implications of Evan Peters as Quicksilver being in the show. So that's kind of where my head's at right now. I'm gonna ask you what's kind of on your mind. What are you most looking forward to? And then we'll take a few questions from the audience. We have a couple hundred people watching right now,
Oh,
so
wow.
we'll take a couple questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up here. But Dan, what are you kind of looking forward to? What's on your mind right now as you're thinking about the rest of the show?
Well, back to your point about like who's behind this. There's a couple of other suspects I kind of want to throw in. I think obviously like Agnes remains a big question for me.
Yeah.
There have been several references to the devil throughout the show. They say like the devil's in the details, and they've really kind of hit this word devil a few times. Agnes's rabbit, his name is like Old Sparky, is what she calls him. There's just kind of like these things. And so in the Marvel universe of comics, there is a literal character that is the devil named Mephisto. That has a long history with the Scarlet Witch that I would keep an eye on. I also there during the opening credits, I think of episode 2, there's an image of a villain named the Grim Reaper, who is an ongoing villain in the Marvel universe. Again, these things are hard to tell what is an Easter egg and what is something we should actually be paying attention to.
Yeah.
So that's something that interests me to kind of follow up on. And he was a big part of the Vision comic from Tom King and Gabriel Walta from a few years back. I know that you've read that, David.
Yeah.
So
there's a reference to that comic in this episode, I believe, right? The Vision comic, right?
There's Sparky the dog.
Sparky the dog dies from eating leaves, and that happens in the comic as well. Yeah.
Correct.
Anything else, Dan, before we go to questions?
Yeah, I'm also curious to, keep my eye on, in this episode, they suggested they're going to bring in an aerospace engineer.
Right, because she's like Monica Rambeau says like, I know an aerospace engineer or something like that, or I know the perfect guy for this or something like that, right? So it's like, who is that?
Yeah, people have thought that it might be Reed Richards, but I don't think so, of the Fantastic Four. I think it's a character named Blue Marvel. Who is a major scientist character and one of the off and on Avengers in the comics, and I suspect that is going to come into play, and especially because he's a big ally of Monica Rambeau in the comics, who was one of the first female Captain Marvel, and now she is a character named Spectrum, and you can see that kind of storyline already playing out when they scan her and her like genetic makeup seems different from going in. She like doesn't register. So that's something I'm interested in kind of seeing is, as they develop that character. And I also think that there's a potential that in episode 3, they seeded the Fantastic Four when they discussed a bunch of astronauts who were in outer space, who were blipped. And I wonder if that is the Fantastic Four, like whoever that astronaut team was.
That would be wild, dude. Can you imagine this show potentially bringing Fantastic Four and X-Men into the MCU? That's like
I can. That's just the great thing is that's totally believable. They have such like they just announced a Fantastic Four movie. They haven't announced any X-Men movies, but they have such great forethought and they have such great resources to pull from. They can do this kind of thing.
Indeed. Okay, we got a few things in the chat room. Candace reaffirms something I said, which is Dottie is the key to everything in this town. Stay woke, Candace says. So yeah, that seems like it is prescient. Candace also says she's wondering about the missing person and witness protection, right? That was the original reason for the visit that Monica makes to the town. I don't know if you have any theories about that, but I think that's interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I for some reason
some people
I guess
speculated like, is that Reed Richards? But I think you're right that the space thing is a far better way to introduce that character into the world.
I think back then when I was unsure of the timeline, I thought maybe it was like Wanda, after the events of Endgame, she kind of wanted to disappear. But now that time has gone on and she brings that back up again, I am curious. That's a good point.
There's a bunch of like people putting out theories in the chat, and I'm just gonna pop them up, and let's just
Sure.
like give a 1 sentence response to each one, thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, how about this? All right. Timothy Mabley says, hearing theories that people who came back from the snap could be mutants because of the radiation it involved from the stones seems pretty far fetched. I'm gonna go thumbs down on this.
Thumbs down. 50% of the population are mutants. It seems like
Yeah.
a very large number.
I agree. Okay. Separate theory from the chat is what if the Wanda's parents who were named in the episode were her adoptive parents, and we learned that at the end of all those commercials? So there's a theory that I don't really understand what Brian San Nicholas is saying, but there's a theory that the men and the women in the commercials are Wanda's parents, like Wanda and Pietro's parents. Thumbs up or thumbs down on that one?
I don't feel either way about it.
I'm a thumbs up.
I
I
need
think,
to revisit it.
Yeah, because it's basically the same man and woman in all the commercials in all these kind of like household scenarios, and each. Some people have said each commercial represents like an infinity stone. You know, like each commercial like ties into an infinity stone. The very first commercial where like you hear this ticking kind of ties in with like her origin story of how like she was waiting for this Stark bomb to explode. It feels like could be like each one could be tied into traumatic events from Wanda's upbringing. Lagos being the most recent one where she accidentally used her powers to kill a bunch of civilians. I think it's possible that they're her parents. So that's kind of a theory that I'm a fan of. So thumbs up for me. Eric Giraldi and a couple of other people have asked, is Agnes testing Wanda's power when she asked Wanda to resurrect Sparky? So there's this moment in this episode 5, where where Agnes says, wait, you can do that? And for me, like you can bring Sparky back to life. And for me, it seemed like genuine shock that Agnes was expressing versus like she was testing her. Did you have a sense that like Agnes might be testing Wanda's resurrection abilities?
I think it could be a bit of both. I don't think that she was like testing it, but I think that there is something with Agnes studying and interacting with Wanda in a way that it is more than just like a normal townsperson caught up in this.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. I think that's about it. This is a good one to end on.
Okay.
Ernest Calderon says, would you want a gray, half-dead Vision sticking around for good?
Yes. It's just weird enough to be very entertaining.
I have to say, seeing the gray Vision with all his stuff gone from his skull and everything was like really upset. I don't want to see that again. I'm fine. I'm fine seeing him walking around and having a grand old time, and and being reanimated corpse and stuff like that. That's fine, but I don't want to see just the corpse part. It's too upsetting. So
I want a TV show about Vision signing DNR papers and writing a will. Like what was that like for that lawyer who helped him draft that up and put that into play? I mean,
he didn't do a very good job with his advance directive. Is my sense, unfortunately. So
cool detail about that is that the images of like Wanda resuscitating Vision is a deleted scene from Endgame that they repurposed here, which I think is kind of a neat way to utilize that.
By the way, there was also one other thing that somebody in the chat mentioned that I thought, I know I said I'd let you go, but there's one other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was really interesting, which is Gary Yarbrough in the chat says, in the previously on WandaVision, they showed Wanda saying she didn't belong here to Vision, but in the actual show, she said she had to run home, as she actually said in the previous episode, which I'm like, wow, like that is weird when a show does a previously on and they show something that didn't actually happen.
That is weird.
Do you know what I'm talking about though? Does that make sense?
That doesn't ring a bell, but now that you're saying that,
I remember watching it. I remember watching the previously on and thinking to myself, I don't remember it playing out like that in the actual show. But I think, assuming we are remembering it correctly, which I'm not sure we are, it is a great way of like saying like how the show is playing with the nature of reality itself. Is, by the way, you cannot even trust the previously on credits. So, well, Dan,
I guess I just haven't been watching them eagle-eyed enough.
That's the thing. There's so many Easter eggs. There's so many references in the show. It does reward repeat viewings. Hey, this has been a blast. Thanks to all several hundred of you for tuning into this. I had no idea there would be any interest, but maybe we'll do this again, perhaps when the finale wraps up or something like that. Dan, this has been a pleasure. You can find Dan's work at the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, which is available wherever podcasts can be downloaded. He's also on Twitter at Sup Spider Talk. Dan Gvozden, thanks for joining me on my YouTube channel today. Really appreciate it.
This was a lot of fun. Yeah, I look forward to chatting again about this. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this video, you can always like and subscribe to make sure you get whatever is coming up next. Hit the bell icon to get the notifications. And also a huge thanks to all of my patrons at patreon.com/DaveChen for making all of my work online possible. Thanks. We'll see you in the next one.